In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jaros.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Very nice to be with you here, back in the saddle after a week off. Seth did a great job filling in for me last week, so thank you, Seth Baker, for taking that responsibility up. Heavy, it's a big seat, of course, we all know, right? Adjust, of course. Well, on today's program, we're talking about testimonies and conversions, or deconversions. There have been a number of Christian cultural leaders who have left the faith. We'll be talking about that on today's program. We've got just a few things, a couple announcements before we jump into our show topic, which, by the way, there's been some great engagement online thus far on our page, which has been wonderful. Thank you for those that are chiming in. So first, let me say this. We are now less than 2 months away from the annual Defenders Conference on October 18 and 19. We will be at Christ Church of Oak Brook this year. We were there a couple years back, and we are glad to be partnering with Christ Church of Oak Brook to bring to you Gospel Differences. We've got, right now, 3 confirmed keynote speakers, Drs. Mike Lacona, Craig Keener, and Rob Bowman. They will be presenting their different views on the Gospel Differences. It's going to be fascinating to hear them engage with one another. And there will be some other breakout sessions as well. I want to encourage you to come to Chicagoland for a great weekend. What some folks have done is they come in and they spend that Sunday, which would be October 20th, kind of touring the city. A great opportunity. Last year we had folks from all sorts of different states across the country come in. Truly, I want to say this humbly, a great quality conference. Your time is very well spent in edifying yourself on these issues. And we do this to partner with local churches, with lay-level folks, with Christian high school teachers that come up from different areas to help them be prepared to have that that knowledge, the loving God with their mind. And so if they have kids, students who might ask, hey, well, why are there these differences in the Gospels? You might have multiple answers for how you can guide through that obstacle which someone might be having questions or doubts. And questions and doubts are really a crux of the deconversion issue, which we will get into shortly. I want to, if I haven't yet already, I want to formally introduce Mark Lester, our movie review guy, is actually taking up associate producer duties here at the podcast. And so, Mark, I want to welcome you to our live program today.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I didn't know I was supposed to say something, but yes, thank you.
Mark, let me ask you this. What was the movie you saw this past week?
Blinded by the Light.
And what's that one about?
That's a lesser-known movie. It's kind of a coming-of-age type drama with lesser-known actors, really, about living in England in the 1980s and teen finding his escapism, if you will, through the music of Bruce Springsteen.
Huh. Okay, interesting. One of those music... There have been a number of music films my wife and I really enjoyed yesterday, which I know you didn't enjoy, but, you know. And there was Rocket Man, too. Any other ones that have come?
More recently, not entirely. It really... I mean... Because last year was the one with Queen, with Bohemian Rhapsody.
That's right, yeah.
But yeah, no, there have been a lot that have been celebrating a lot of random musicians.
Music icons. Yep. Good. Well, nice. Well, and if people want to check that out, your recent movie review, they can go to apologetics315.com and check out Mark's review. You get a little bit of a summary there and some thoughtful criticism as well sometimes, if it's something you think they could have done better. And also, Mark usually provides a couple sentences for parents to consider, if they're wondering if it's a movie their kids should see. Yeah. But we know Chris was always a troublemaker checking out movies.
Uh-oh. Unsurprisingly.
It's good to be back in the saddle here. Okay, so testimonies and conversions. this is something I wanted to talk about and have just an episode to open up our phone lines, to hear from you, to talk about. I've got some thoughts on folks. So some heavy material when we're talking about people leaving the faith. And I know some of the comments we've gotten on Facebook have been accusing people of seeking more attention. And certainly that's not the primary reason. So, for example, there have been two main deconversion announcements that in the past few weeks here. One is Joshua Harris, who is perhaps most known for his book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Secondly, Marty Sampson made news. He's a writer and was a leader for Hillsong, a music worship leader. And he made headlines because people thought he was leaving. He said, well, I haven't left yet. My faith is on rocky ground, basically, he's saying. And then just yesterday, actually, he announced he was no longer is a Christian. So, which is very sad and unfortunate. I guess it's been a while since I've done the call lines, Chris, but our call lines are open, and Mark will be attending to those, and I'll be checking them out when I can. The number to call is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. I'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts are on these recent cases of deconversions, or some might just call them conversions to atheism or to some other worldview. Before we talk about testimonies, though, let's talk about these deconversions. Again, we've had a lot of interaction here on our Facebook page about the news about Marty Sampson, and I want to go through some of this, but first some of my thoughts. Let's start with Joshua Harris. He was a Christian author, and again, like I said, most known for I Kissed Dating Goodbye. That's a book I never read. Chris, you told me something like it ruined a number of your relationships.
No, a girl I was dating in high school broke up with me over it. We both read the book, and she came to a different conclusion than I did. And she's like, we're going to break up now. So I appreciated the book, but I was a little peeved at its contents for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua Harris.
Thanks, Joshua Harris. But
you know what?
It was really super popular.
It was.
When I was in high school.
Yeah. Now, to his credit, he actually came around, I think it was like a year or two ago, maybe. And my wife even said he made a Netflix film. Maybe it was a Prime Video or something about that before he left the faith. He went back and got people's advice, and he realized this was bad advice for many people. So, again, I haven't read the book. But I take it the main thrust was on courtship, dating.
I think so. I honestly don't remember a ton of its contents other than thinking like that sounds sound, but as a high schooler I really hadn't formed a worldview on dating or marriage quite yet.
Yeah. And young people are so formidable. And he was young when he wrote it too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, looking back, he realizes, hey, maybe that wasn't quite the best advice at the time or for some, maybe even many people. So props to him where it's due, if he realizes it wasn't good advice. But now let's look at his recent announcements. And in fact, some of these announcements have been coming through Instagram, not even necessarily like a website to start. But I wanted to load up some of the messages here. First, what made headlines before he left the faith was that he and his wife were separating. Now, maybe that meant divorce. I don't think that was the terminology he used, but it was separation. Let's see here. I'm going to carry this over here, Chris, if I can swing it. All right. So here we have the news from Joshua Harris about his separating with his wife. We're writing to share the news that we are separating, and we'll continue to, I think it's something about a friendship there. Let's see here. I've got to open it up again. Text is a little too small for me. Okay. So here we go. Continue our life together as friends. In recent years, some significant changes have taken place in both of us. It's with sincere love for one another and understanding of our unique story as a couple that we are moving forward with this decision. We hope to create a generous and supportive future for each other and our 3 amazing children. So here, this made headlines that he was separating. But to me, the first hint was here that there were significant changes in our lives. Now, some of these changes I don't think we know. Joshua has not been all that public with some of those details. Sometimes we want to figure out what's the rationale, what's happening here, and we'll get into that a little later before I first explain what is going on. Then I'm going to get into maybe why or how it's going on. So here we've got Joshua Harris announcing the separation, and then we also have here this announcement, which came, let's see here, not much long thereafter. And this was about his leaving the faith. So let me zoom up here. We can see his explanation. My heart is full of gratitude. I wish you could see all the messages people sent me after the announcement of my divorce. Look, here's the next paragraph. I'm learning that no group has the market cornered on grace, he says. This week I've received grace from Christians, atheists, evangelicals, ex-evangelicals, straight people, LGBTQ people, and everyone in between. Of course, there have been strong words of rebuke from religious people. While not always pleasant, I know they are seeking to love me. There have also been spiteful, hateful comments that angered and hurt me. The information that was left out of our announcement, here we go, is that I have undergone a massive shift in regard to my faith in Jesus. The popular phrase for this is deconstruction. The biblical phrase is falling away. By all the measurements that I have for defining a Christian, I am not a Christian. Many people tell me that there's a different way to practice faith, and I want to remain open to this, but I'm not there now. He continues on. He basically apologizes to the LGBTQ community. He talks about past views he's taught on human sexuality. I regret standing against marriage equality. Very sexual ethics focused. There is a strong pressure from the culture today to assent to what Christians historically would think is sexual promiscuity and even sexual perversity. This is a fascinating social experiment. 20 years ago, this would be unheard of. One atheist came out 10 years ago and said in the past 10 years, this is the fastest social shift, arguably in human history, and we better be careful. It's something to look out for. And in fact, I remember having various Facebook discussions with folks who made the argument, what two people do in their own bedrooms, up to them. You know, they're just minding their own business. It'll never affect you. All of that was nonsense, and I called it out then. Because of the slippery slope. Now, this is not a slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy is when something necessarily doesn't follow. This contingently follows. And I predicted it. Many people predicted it, and they saw this stuff coming. This is all to say, now there's this pressure to give in to even what Harris recognizes are non-biblical, non-Christian standards, right? He says, what I've identified as what is a Christian, I can no longer call myself that. So even he recognizes this, that Christians have certain beliefs, have had these beliefs since the beginning, and are what are crucial and critical for being a Christian. So there's not this sort of broad view of, hey, we can be a Christian but embrace, promiscuous views of sexuality. So to that, I want to talk about a comment from one of my former peers at King's College London, Mark. Mark, thanks for writing in. Mark says here, it's possible to move from a conservative form of Christianity without necessarily abandoning the faith. Many thoughtful Christians find themselves moving to a more liberal and progressive form that takes the Bible seriously, but not literally, and takes on board the findings of an historical, critical approach to the Bible. Many of us have made that journey and have found our lives enriched by it. Now, Mark, I want to agree with you. Some of this is true. Depending upon use labels there, which can be helpful sometimes, I'm more liberal and progressive. So that just sort of depends on how you're defining your terms and what your spectrum is. Like, what is a conservative theological view? And so to that point, yeah, maybe some things are helpful. For example, one of the issues for why people leave the faith is the doctrine of inerrancy, by which they take and mean and understand that the Bible is perfect in every way. It accurately conveys, a literal accounting of what happened, and a more wooden, rigid view of inerrancy, one which I reject, is the foundation for some of these people that leave the faith. One of those persons is Dr. Bart Ehrman. He is a former Christian. He is a New Testament scholar at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he went through the MDiv program at Trinity. He's got a PhD from Princeton, I believe. And he held to this view of inerrancy, and he realized, hey, there's an error in the text. And for him, I would argue, the house of cards came shattering down. So inerrancy is an issue for some people. So when Mark talks about how it can be helpful, yes, for some people, maybe a little bit of shift away from what is, an inaccurate view. But I also want to caution against going really too far, even to the center or beyond on the theological spectrum. Because I don't think that Christianity can be compatible with a view of sexual ethics, which is basically a free-for-all. Love is love, whatever that means. What does that mean? How do people know what that means? What does it mean to love the right way? These are questions which are not answered by the marketing schemes. It's just promoted. Well, love is love. Okay, but we have right ways of loving things and we have wrong ways of loving things. So that never goes questioned. It just seems intuitive. Yeah, love, it's a good thing. But really, there are deeper questions that need to be asked here. We should be skeptical of the messages that we are told. So props to these individuals that are questioning their Christian beliefs. I think it's healthy to ask questions, and unfortunately, they're not finding the right answers, even though the answers are there. So let me talk about Marty Sampson. Marty Sampson is a now former worship leader, writer, singer, songwriter of Hillsong. Hillsong Church is based in Australia, but extremely popular with their Christian music. I mean, some would say this has even become sort of a business for them, a music enterprise. Sampson has made a number of remarks. I want to try to find these here because he actually deleted all but one post on his Instagram account. So here's what he says. When he talked about how he's genuinely losing his faith, he says, "It doesn't bother me. Like, what bothers me now is nothing. I'm so happy now, so at peace with the world. It's crazy." This is a soapbox moment, so here it goes. How many preachers fall? Many. Not one talks about it. How many miracles happen? Not many. No one talks about it. Why is the Bible full of contradictions? No one talks about it. How can God be love yet send 4 billion people to a place all because they don't believe? No one talks about it. Christians can be the most judgmental people on the planet. They can also be some of the most beautiful and loving people, but it's not for me, Marty Sampson wrote. So here's what's interesting. When he says no one talks about it, he's making a universal claim. Now, maybe he's making a general claim, but universally, that's just not true. There are people talking about it. Generally, maybe that's the case. And maybe that's especially the case in the type of Christian culture which Sampson was living in. Now, he did later on talk about these Christian apologists he's been listening to, Christian philosophers. He also noted atheist speakers and writers that he had been listening to. And I do want to say that the credentials between the two camps is it's a no-brainer. One camp had a lot higher credentials, educational background, publications, and the others were experienced, but just didn't quite have the same creds. And I think that might be a bit telling as well. Why didn't Sampson share images of, say, Michael Roos, a philosopher of Florida State University, some of the more popular academic atheist philosophers? This is to say, if Marty is listening, I wish you'd continue to explore. The answers are out there. Christians have been thinking about these issues for centuries. And it's nothing to shy away from. I want to applaud you for looking into these questions. But I think some folks give up too easily. And they give up for a number of reasons. One of those we've already explored, inerrancy. Their faith is based on a house of cards. It's not a good foundation. If your faith is based on inerrancy, then you are basing your faith on what some would call like a tertiary doctrine. Inerrancy is a conclusion one should come to. It's not the starting point. How do you know the Bible is even the Word of God? And the question, how you answer that, you begin to present arguments not from inerrancy, but from, say, an analysis of the text. It's reliable. Look at Luke. He was a great historian, but you're not talking about inerrancy anymore. So we need to keep that in mind. I do see a call that has come in here, and we're going to put this person in here. Caller 4216, state your name for us if you could, so kindly.
Hey, Kurt, it's Christian, just calling in on this subject.
Hey, Christian, how you doing today?
Good. This is an interesting topic, a sad topic, one that I just wanted to share a little bit from my perspective. Obviously, growing up in the 90s, Joshua Harrison, his book was a big influence. Also, a lot of Christian artists. One that really influenced me was Christian musician and singer-songwriter Derek Webb, who was one of the front men for a band, Caedmon's Call. And he had many big hits, was up in the top selling albums out there, and for many years a great influencer and really thought-provoking person. I think it was more shocking to me that he walked away from the faith because he was such a critical thinker. And you tend to put people like Joshua Harrison, maybe more of a pop culture thinker, young person who, got a lot of fame early on and moved away. But, Derek Webb was somebody who certainly read a lot, had a lot of different influences, and still over time has moved further and further away from what I think is the truth, from God's word, from his politics, obviously not lining up with a lot of evangelicalism, and some moral failures that he went through, and probably experiencing some of the rejection and hurt that comes from that, being exposed within the church, and then finally just renouncing his faith, I think within the last 3 or 4 years. And now he's coming out with, to me, some of the most depressing music I've heard, where he used to be such a light in what he would share, and convicting writer. So that's been a hard thing to walk through. And I think one of the most salient points that I've heard lately was from the lead singer of Skillet. I don't know if you read his response to a lot of this, but one of the points he made was that he would caution these people who are walking away from the faith to try to be influencers in a time when they are still in a significant state of confusion. And a lot of them are going out and trying to proactively draw people away from the faith that they just walked away from, so fresh into this new world, and yet they're still so convinced as they were when they were in the faith for many, many years, to try to guide people away down the same path they're going down. So just some of the things that have come to mind while I'm listening to you and thinking on the subject. Yeah.
There are so with Webb, in the same way as with Samson, music leaders who maybe aren't. It's a different field than, say, studying theology. So, like for me, what's maybe more what should be more concerning is so music leaders, of course, they've got great influence, and with the people and the lives they touch, the way that they touch people's lives. Whereas more academic thinkers and thoughtful folks, like more formally speaking, I should say, not that musician singer-songwriters aren't thoughtful, but like academic theology. So like Bart Ehrman and even Joshua Harris as a thoughtful author, a thought leader, if you will. That to me is a bit more concerning, because people might view them as authoritative for the mind. It's really sad, and I know some people are just throwing out, like some of these guys say they're getting hate mail and all that, and that is unfortunate. So for you, Christian, when you so when was it that Derek Webb left the faith, and how did that affect you? Did it give you a pause for thought?
Yeah, well, and just as another contextual piece, the Gospel Coalition, I think within the last 2 years, releases some kind of list of who they think that some of the greatest influencers of modern evangelicalism today.
Yeah.
And Derek Webb was in the top 100 of those thinkers. So these singer-songwriters and poets and artists, and there's very thoughtful branches of that are really intertwined with academic thought. And Derek would definitely fit into that. And so for me, it was just seeing a guy who is so good at calling out some of the things that I think you would agree with him on, and I certainly agree with him on, foibles of the sort of pop culture, subculture of Christianity that had come out and challenged the church to think deeper and to be more like Christ. And that, and in that, we lost a very strong voice, critical voice in that time, and it's heartbreaking, certainly, to see somebody walk away from that. I'm older now, so my life it doesn't hinge on the viewpoint of a celebrity. Yeah. So as it would have when I was in high school, it probably would have been far more devastating if it was somebody like the guy from Hillsong. I think the impressionableness of the people who like Hillsong music, typically in that teen to college age demographic, are going to be far more swayed to doubt themselves. And these guys are attempting to clear a path and make it easier. For Derek Webb, he points to a guy named David Bazan, who was the lead singer of a group called Pedro the Lion, who, and saying these guys are sort of your model to follow after and walk away from the faith. And there's a community building there that is always scary, because they're taking a lot of the language of Christianity and they're using it to try to draw people away from the very faith that they're employing.
Yeah. And that's something I'm going to talk about after the break, which we're coming up to. But yeah, there is this sense of borrowing. So like with morality, and I'll get into this a little later, this sense of morals for people that not only give up Christian theism, but faith in God, broadly speaking. Where is this sense of morality that they have? Where does that come from? How do they ground that? And it just seems like, if God does not exist, there are no objective morals. So folks here shouldn't be all that outraged, because they can't ground, they can't make sense of why is it that it's an injustice for a government to mistreat its citizens? Right. If we're just space dust, why is that really the case? We don't we don't say that there are these animal injustices in the animal kingdom. Things just are. So yeah, fascinating. Christian, I want to thank you for calling in. And Derek,
thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, Derek Webb's another name that I hadn't heard of, but I guess that's happened in the past. Christian, again, thank you for calling in and for listening. God bless you, and thanks for your support of our program. All right, so this is, again, a tricky subject, because while in one sense, we need to speak the truth, we want to understand what's happening here. I think some people are going too far. They're saying people are doing this for fame or whatnot. I don't think that's right. Think about Marty Sampson. His career was writing Christian music, and now he's giving it up. So he's giving up his career. He's giving up his target audience, his following. Likely, a lot of people. He's going to lose a lot of his following. There is no personal motive here. I think these are genuine questions that people are dealing with. But now, so consider this. So John Cooper of the Christian, what type of band is Skillet, Chris?
Like
like
really weird alternative rock from the 90s.
I didn't even know they were alternative.
Mark thought there was just one type of Christian.
I knew they were rock. I didn't think alternative.
Yeah. So here's what John says. He quotes Samson. I just read today in a renowned worship leader statement, how could a God of love send people to hell? No one talks about it. Here's what Cooper says. As if he is the first person to ask this. Brother, you are not that unique, Cooper wrote. The church has wrestled with this for 1,500 years. Literally, everybody talks about it. Children talk about it in Sunday school. There's 1 billion books written on the topic. And here's what I think is interesting, and I think maybe Samson felt a little judged by this. Cooper says, just because you don't get the answer you want doesn't mean that that we are unwilling to wrestle with it. We wrestle with Scripture until we are transformed by the renewing of our minds. So Cooper, I want to say thank you because there are answers out there. There are Christians who have been thinking about this, and there are different answers to these questions. I say that as if it's a good thing. Some people, they think like if there are multiple answers, well, nothing is true. Just like, oh, there are multiple religions, therefore, none of them are true. That is logically fallacious. You could think of different shapes of the earth. Logically possible different shapes of the earth. Hey, maybe it's a cube. Maybe it's flat. No, there is one true answer for the way that the earth really is shaped, a sphere. So just because there are multiple answers doesn't mean all of them are wrong. Okay, why is this important for apologetics? When I'm trying to help people overcome an obstacle, I present multiple solutions because maybe they aren't too fond of, say, the one that I embrace. So for example, let's talk about the doctrine of hell here since it's relevant. And then I'll just say this briefly because then we've got to take a break. Multiple solutions here because maybe someone doesn't like the traditional view that people are, eternally punished in hell for their sins. Think of fire, medieval imagery here. I'm not convinced the medieval imagery is true, literally true. Maybe they don't like that. So there's another alternative. One of our sponsors of the program, actually, Rethinking Hell. They hold to what traditionally has been called annihilationism. They like to call it conditionalism. But that basically people will cease to exist. That's another view of hell. Another view of hell is universalism, or Jerry Walls holds to post-mortem evangelism of sorts, sort of a purgatory for Protestants. So there are these other possible solutions to the good concern. What happens to those that don't believe in Jesus? What happens? What about people who've never heard about or hear about Jesus? Those are good questions, but there are answers. It's not as if there aren't, and that's one thing that I want to push against. All right, we've got to take a break here. When we come back, though, I'd love to, if you want to call in and chat with me, I'd love to hear from you, 505-2-STRIVE. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about some of these apologetic issues and even Christian responses to this, the value and power of testimonies, and even how deconversions are a testimony unto themselves. So stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Let's say there's this Christian apologist. You love their message, but have trouble finding their videos, their articles, or social media posts. How do you stay connected to them? We're on it. Defenders Media uses the tools of the digital age to create content for your favorite apologists. We give them more screen time, more digital soapboxes, and more presence to deliver more of the content that you love. That's what we do.
I know that social media is important to those of you who follow my work. Many respond to my videos and posts on Facebook and Twitter. But it becomes impossible after a while to keep up with it all and to continue with research. That's why I'm thrilled that we have found a solution, Defenders Media.
Whether it's a website, whether it's printed material, whether it's a question on graphics, I cannot do what I do and reach my audience without the help of Defenders Media. They have been integral in helping me to reach my audience.
Defenders Media ensures consistent content reaches your hand from today's leading apologists and apologetic ministries, like Mike Lycona, Apologetics 315, the Veracity Hill podcast with Kurt Jaros, and more.
To learn more, text the word Defenders to 555-888, and we'll send you a free PDF of the top 5 ways to share the gospel online. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsor. If you want to learn how you can become a sponsor, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com. Click on that patron tab. And speaking of our website, we're working on transitioning it to get a facelift, a makeover, if you will, more so than a facelift. And it hasn't received an update in 3 years, a design update anyway. And so we've been working on that and hope in the next coming days to have a fresh new website. We're actually going to have the videos just nicely embedded on the homepage because as we started out, this was just an audio gig we were doing here in the bedroom of my house, upstairs bedroom there. Remember that, Chris? Mm-hmm. And slowly been growing what we're doing here with the production value, and we couldn't do it without your help. If you enjoy watching our program, listening to the program, please consider partnering with us. $5 or $10 a month with many people chipping in can go a long way to helping us grow, to go and grow with the types of people we're reaching, the types of content we're engaging with. It affords me the opportunity to spend some time to research and think about what we're going to talk about. For example, today's show, I spent some time and was reading some articles up on this, watched even a video that Paul Copan did on deconversion stories. I've got a few quotes I want to share from that. Actually, quotes from others that, for example, C.S. Lewis, I want to get into that. Lewis has a great quote in Mere Christianity. So we're talking about deconversion stories and testimonies. And before getting into testimonies and sort of Christian responses, I want to finish saying some things on these deconversion stories. I think it is sad what's happening with these Christian leaders. Some folks, I think, struggle to realize the alternatives available. So again, to one of my former peers, Mark, he talks about these alternatives, and that's good. There are some positions which are available, I think, feasibly available for Christians to embrace. There are others that I think are infeasible. For example, views on human sexuality. I think there are infeasible views that the culture is demanding our assent to. And in many situations today, that cultural pressure will not stop. And I think it goes to the root of the issue about acceptance and deep-rooted issues in some people about being accepted, a desire to be accepted. So that's going to just continue on. Christians are called to not be of the world. And so just because the culture is doing something doesn't mean the church should respond. Of course, there are sometimes when maybe the church is blind to some issues, and those are issues we should consider and think about, but we should come to a right conclusion on this. And there are other issues the church needs to, maybe has been blinded to, maybe needs to think about, maybe handled, maybe even caused, and the church still needs to come to right conclusions about. And unfortunately, I with some of these deconversion stories, we're seeing people leave. They're and I don't think they're coming to the right answers here, frankly. So we've got a few comments here, folks, online that I want to attend to here. Hopefully one won't start an echo because of here. We've got Andrew, he's chiming in. He just says, love of sin. Okay, Andrew, thank you for that comment. Let me talk about that. Morality. That is an issue that some people, one of the reasons why they leave the faith is because they want to embrace a lifestyle which conforms more to their desires for their actions. And I want to say that broadly because that can apply in many cases. Some people, they wouldn't phrase it this way, but they like sinning. They want to be able to do something which they know the Christian worldview does not accept. This is entirely speculative. All right, big caveat, entirely speculative. We didn't get a lot of details about Joshua Harris. I thought it was fascinating that he mentioned LGBTQ a number of times, and then later on posted a picture of him at a gay pride parade. So I don't know if there is something going on there, but sometimes you hear it's a family member or something who is gay, and then there's this sense of acceptance. Even a Christian philosopher, Nicholas Wolterstorff, actually, who I actually enjoy reading, he came out in support of homosexual behavior. Why? Not because of any robust ethical treatment, philosophical treatment, but because there's a family member of his who has homosexual desires. And so it's interesting to see here when people know someone, it becomes very personal for them. But at the same time, I don't think our relationships certainly should not be a necessary factor in our ethical frameworks. So we need to be careful about how we are evaluating our experiences, what type of value we give to them. And I'm going to come back to that about our experiences because that deals a lot with testimonies as well. Let me talk briefly about science and faith. Before I do so here, Rob wrote in with regard to these deconversions, could it be it was more about the movement for Harris and Samson than the Messiah? Yeah, there has been a movement, it seems, especially with the new atheism, it was cool to sort of give up one's faith. And maybe this is part of that movement. What's really interesting then here, as I get into this, is testimonies and sharing of faith. But quickly, just science and faith. This is another reason why people leave the faith. I think Samson, even in his recent post announcing his leaving, he talks about science. I want to find it here. He talks about how science is basically making Christianity appear just like any other religion. I'll see if I can get that up. But so that's fascinating as well. Science is the observation of the external world, seeing how it operates and all of that. And when you're performing and doing science, you operate under certain rules. When you're doing theology, you're also operating under certain rules. These don't necessarily conflict with each other. A scientific explanation is not necessarily a theological explanation. For example, let's suppose there's a rock slide upstream. That's a scientific explanation for why a river could dry up, even temporarily. It just so happens that Joshua and the Israelites are at the Jordan River at a certain time in which a rock slide occurs upstream. And lo and behold, they cross the Jordan River on dry ground. There's both a scientific explanation and there's a theological explanation for why that occurs. Given, I think, one of the factors in evaluating what a miracle is timing. So, science and religion don't necessarily conflict. We can have scientific explanations for phenomenon, but that doesn't mean that there is not a theological explanation or a philosophical explanation behind some event. So I think it's really sad when folks think that the science has spoken as if science is this agent itself. Science is just what some people do, just like history is what some people do, mathematics is what some people do. So let's be cautious about the philosophical assumptions we carry in and carry over into our evaluations. Okay, let me talk about testimonies, and we've got some folks that have been chiming in. Steve was watching. Michael, thanks for tuning in today, guys. Philip says hello. Shane, now watching. Thanks, guys. I want to talk about testimonies and what they are. Testimonies, testimonial evidence. This is something that Christians value. And what I mean is not just our sharing of our testimonies, but also in apologetics we talk about testimonial evidence. Testimonial evidence in the Gospels about what people saw. Testimonial evidence of Paul. Paul claims to have seen the risen Lord. Paul makes a claim about who Jesus appeared to. We value testimonial evidence in our court systems. There is value to testimony. Now, sometimes we think, say, with Mormonism, when a Mormon shares his testimony, we just kind of brush it off. Oh, isn't that nice? You know, the Mormon church saved you from drugs, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So we kind of brush it off. And sometimes people just brush off Christian testimonies too. We have to understand sometimes how people are perceiving us if we want to be a good apologist. So there's still value, though, in testimony. Some people might brush off Christian testimonies about what Jesus has done for them. It doesn't carry the same type of value as like an eyewitness to some event. But there's still value in sharing our stories. Why is this? Well, Joshua Harris and Marty Sampson share their testimonies in their deconversions. Think about it. If they didn't think it would help people, why would they share about what's happening in their lives? So even they still think there's testimonial value here. It's persuasive. It gets people thinking about these issues. In the same way, when we are giving our Christian testimonies, we need to get people thinking again. We don't just need to say, oh, how nice it is. I said a prayer when I was in 3rd grade and asked Jesus into my heart, and I've had a good life ever since. We need to be challenging people with our testimonies. So I want to applaud a number of Christian apologists who have taken upon themselves to make public postings about this. 2 guys in particular. Hunter Baker has posted a video. He shared his testimony. He talks about the value of Christian apologetics. And Doug Groteis of Denver Seminary. Hunter Baker's at Union. Doug's at Denver Seminary. And I want to share with you what Doug wrote here. He posted this today. Marty Sampson says, "Goodbye, I say believe." After publicly questioning his faith, Christian songwriter and worship leader Marty Sampson has renounced it while expressing love for many Christians. Sampson earlier said that no one was talking about apologetics, but that he was reading apologists. It was hard to make sense of that. He has given no definitive reason not to follow Christ or any good argument against Christianity. So instead of analyzing his doubts and apostasy, I will make my own confession. Right? What Groteis is talking about here is, what's the argument that he's brought forward? A question is not an argument, by the way. And I know Cameron of Capturing Christianity would like that. A question is not an argument. How do you know there are no McDonald's on Mars? Ooh, skepticism. It's not a good argument. It gets people thinking, but it just doesn't lead people to conclusions. There are implications, and that's where the arguments are found, in the implications. What are people implying by their question? They might be implying certain premises from which a conclusion follows. Groteis writes, "I was brought up to saving faith in Jesus in June of 1976. A friend at the time said that if I became a Christian, I would only associate with Christians, read Christian books, and that I would essentially stop being a thinking person. Was he ever wrong? Since then, I have, in a way, tried to refute Christianity as I have defended it as rational and pertinent to the whole of life. I have studied and written on all the challenges to biblical Christianity, various forms of atheism, Marxism, postmodernism, Darwinism, and alternative religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, New Age thought, Islam, Baha'i faith. I have debated and been on panel discussions with New Age people, atheists, and others. I've spoken to teams of souls who were doubting a previous Christian faith or pursuing the possibility of following Jesus. I have exposited and preached the gospel for decades in various churches. I have suffered the cruelties of dementia and chronic illness through plight of my first wife, Rebecca Merrill Grotice. I found meaning in all of it. The sacred was not quenched by suffering, but purified. The sacred was not quenched by suffering, but purified. I wrote about this in Walking Through Twilight. I remain a Christian. I'm more zealous to know Christ and make him known now than I was a year ago. I'm in. I want to experience what Paul prayed for in Ephesians 1 and 3, to know the fullness of this salvation, to know God better, and to know that the power in me is like the power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him at the right hand of God, far above every name that can be named, in this age or in the one to come. Do I sometimes question God? Yes. Am I sometimes angry at God? Yes. But I know too much to go back. I have worked hard at my worldview and have sought God in every season of life. God is there. He is not silent. Christianity, while not without mysteries, gives us intellectual satisfaction and moral energy. We were made to know, enjoy, and worship our God. Where else can we go? Jesus the Christ has the words and works of eternal life. See John 6. So that's what Grotice wrote here. And I want to read from John 6 what Grotice and Hunter Baker talk about here. Jesus talks about, gives a difficult sermon. He's talking about the bread of life. Many people were confounded by this, what Jesus meant, and many people leave. So in John 6:66, from that time many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Then Jesus said to the 12, do you also want to go away? But Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. While difficult as Jesus' words may be, there is life in him. Notice that in all of these, many of these objections, people don't frequently talk about Jesus. They don't talk about if he was a dishonest person. It's hard to attack Jesus, isn't it? They might attack Matthew, Mark, and Luke about maybe whatever error those authors made. But it's rare for someone to really attack who Jesus is. He's a good moral teacher. But where does that lead people? If he's a good moral teacher, why don't they follow him? They don't really think he's a good moral teacher. What does Jesus say? It's fascinating the reasons that people have for leaving the faith, and not among them are statements or questions about Jesus. Let me talk about Mike Bird's testimony here. Michael Bird is a New Testament scholar in Melbourne, Australia, at Ridley College, and he's author of many books, great CV. One of those was a response to Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God, and Bird's book, along with other contributors, it was called How God Became Jesus. So very fun pun play on Ehrman's text there. Michael Bird says, Bart Ehrman's narrative suggests the more educated you are, the less likely you are to believe. How true is that? It comes across like people who doubt are the thinking people, and Christians aren't the thinking people. Bart Ehrman's narrative suggests the more educated you are, the less likely you are to believe. My life proves otherwise. I've got my own deconversion story to match his. Some have great confidence in skeptical scholarship, and I once did, perhaps more than anyone else. If anyone thinks they are assured in their unbelief, I was more committed. Born of unbelieving parents, never baptized or dedicated, on scholarly credentials, a PhD from a secular university. As to zeal, mockery, the church. As to ideological righteousness, totally radicalized. Faith grew from seeds of doubt, and I came upon a whole new world that, for the first time, actually made sense to me. To this day, I do not find faith stifling or constricting. Rather, faith has been liberating and transformative for me. It has opened a constellation of meaning, beauty, hope, and life that I had been indoctrinated to deny. And so began a lifelong quest to know, study, and teach about the one whom Christians called Lord. That's Michael Bird. So the power of the testimonies here, it's a two-way street. if we think there's influence in, a Christian leader not becoming one, vice versa, we could look at other stories here, like C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, and in Mere Christianity and elsewhere describes his own conversion to the Christian faith. And of course, there are people that are raised Christian, leave, and then they come back too. So there's value and power in that. So on the point of morality, which I talked about earlier, where do these folks who now reject God get their sense of morality? Well, Lewis writes in Mere Christianity, "My arguments against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" The fact that humans seek for consistency in our worldviews, the fact that we call something right and wrong, and we want to be consistent with that, is a testament to the objective nature of morality. We want to conform to what corresponds to reality. Even our desire to conform itself, it's a self-confirming evidence. If we're going to be consistent, why? Why be consistent? Well, because consistency is good. It's objectively good. The desire to correspond with reality is a good and right desire, and it corresponds with an objective norm. So that is further evidence of a creator. So for those that are giving up the faith, this is sad stuff. People are on the road to death. The scripture talks about the way of life and the way of death. And people who forsake the faith, they forsake the existence of God, certainly are on the path to death. The loss of meaning, the loss of morality, the loss of virtue, it's the loss of life itself. Eventually, one day, they'll wake up in the mirror and they'll see a skeleton. They'll just see dry bones. Their body has died. That is where the loss of faith leads. And I hope and pray for people that have left the faith, when they wake up in the morning, they look in the mirror, they realize how much their life has lost because of the lack of correspondence to reality. Not because of consistency with it, but because of a lack of corresponding to reality. And I hope and pray that they'll come back. What reasons may they have? Well, on next week's episode, we're going to be talking about Pascal's wager. And I'm a fan of the wager. Some people are not. But the wager, I think, is very valuable for folks who may be wondering why should they consider coming back to God. Sort of a what have you to lose type of argument. And it's a more robust argument than people realize and have communicated when you really read Pascal. So we'll be talking about that next week. Before I sign off here, let me just look at a couple of our comments here. Thanks, everyone, for your engagement this week, by the way. Philip says, does the Samson deconversion implicate the Hillsong Church in some way? Seems like the leadership of that church body should have helped him disciple him into maturity. My own read of the situation is yes, I think so. I think Hillsong has sort of built up a music enterprise, and it hasn't built up an apologetic enterprise. Boy, would that have been awesome. But they aren't, they're dealing in a different type of an experiential Christianity. And what happens when you can't replicate that? Because you can't replicate week after week the same, you're trying to fake an experience. You know, maybe someone had some great fun thrill that they think was the Holy Spirit, but isn't. So I think you're right on there, Philip. There's something happening with the experiential movement. And so you would expect people to fall away because they can't replicate it. Michael says, education exacerbates pride in many people, and pride is what brings a person to deny God. As they become more important, God becomes less important. That's true. Here's what Samson says, and I don't even know if he realizes he says it like this. This stuck out to me. It was amazing being one of you, but I'm not any more. I love you all and always will. I won't forget how much I love Christians. Even if they don't love me, I will always love you, he says. I'm trying to find it here. He talked about the love of others, and that was fascinating because he said he didn't live for others. I think it's in his post there. But that was fascinating to me. He was trying to be true to himself, right? He didn't want to live for others. It's true, you don't want to put on a facade, but I don't think he realized the gravity of his statement, that he's not out to live for others. That's fascinating because that's truly telling. Folks who give up on God, you're right, they're not living for others. What does Jesus teach us? Love your neighbor as yourself. And hopefully Samson will come around and realize how much there is to life and in loving others. Of course, you don't want to be disingenuous with people. You don't want to be faking it. All right, well, that does it for our program today. I'm grateful for the continued support that we have from our patrons, folks that just chip in a few bucks each month. I'm also grateful for the partnerships with our sponsors, and they are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Fox Restoration. Thanks to our tech team today, Chris and Mark. It was great having you in. I got to change the sign off here now if you're going to be joining us on a regular. I want to thank you for listening in, for thinking about these issues along with me, for your feedback and input. There's a number of comments I didn't get to. Hopefully I'll be able to write to you guys after the program today. But again, as always, thank you for listening in today and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.